Hello everyone and welcome to the final video of Rivals of Ixalan Limited Review Week, the Archetype Guide. In this video I'm going to talk about each of the color pairs and the synergies within them, what tribes they are associated with, and what the other synergies are. I won't be talking about cards that are just good in every deck in this video. If you're looking for a video about the best cards, I did a video earlier this week on the best commons and uncommons in the set, and I also of course reviewed every single card in the set in my full set limited review. Here we won't be talking about things like super good removal spells and things like that unless they have some special synergy within a color pair. All 10 color pairs have sort of clearly delineated archetypes this time around. I'd say 9 of them do. One of them kind of doesn't. Only 8 had it last time, though, so we still have one more archetype that I think is fairly legitimate. The majority of the archetypes are tribal in some sense. For example, the Grixis colors are all about pirates, though each color pair within them emphasizes somewhat different things. The Naya color pairs are all about dinosaurs, though again, the color pairs within them emphasize different things. Blue-green is merfolk, and black-white is vampires. Blue-white and black-green both got signpost commons this time after being left out in Ixalan. Keep in mind that the third pack in this format will be of Ixalan, so in this video I'll also talk about the key cards you'll be looking for in that last pack to round out your deck. First, we'll talk about the 2 tribes that occupy only one color pair, starting with Merfolk. So, at blue-green, our signpost uncommon is Merfolk Mistbinder, which is a Merfolk Lord. It doesn't really try to do anything fancy. You may remember that in Rivals of Ixalan, there was a +1/+1 counter sub-theme, and that's still here, but it's even more minor. It's now more just about playing as many Merfolk as you can, and Merfolk Mistbinder sort of reflects that. So first, let's talk about the Merfolk Payoffs in Rivals of Ixalan at common and uncommon. You have Aquatic Incursion, which is nice because it gives you 2 tokens. So if you do have that Lord in play, this is going to be an incredibly powerful card. It also can make Merfolk unblockable. It also has the nice upside of helping you get to Ascend easier, since it gives you 3 permanents for 1 card. There's also Crashing Tide, which you can play at instant speed if you control Merfolk. It's a great common. It's even better in a Merfolk deck. Silvergill Adept, which is very good in a Merfolk deck. If you're playing this on turn 2 most games, drawing a card off of it, you're going to feel pretty good. Forerunner of the Heralds. All of the major tribes in this format have a Forerunner, and this is Merfolk's. It's one of the places where you do still see +1/+1 counters coming into play. It also lets you tutor up a Merfolk and put it on top of your library, which is pretty nice, especially if what you need is like your Merfolk Lord. Jade Bearer, another card that sort of shows you there is a +1/+1 counter sub-theme here. I don't love this card, to be honest, though. It's good if you're really heavy into Merfolk, obviously, but it being only 1 mana and a 1/1 body means you don't actually ever play it on turn 1 because you have to put the counter somewhere else. It's fine, don't get me wrong. I think I give it a C- in my limited review. It's just not amazing. The other cards we've mentioned so far are all better. There's also Swift Warden, which can give hexproof to one of your Merfolk. It has flash, and it's a nice-sized creature. So those are the payoffs for playing Merfolk. Now let's look more generally at the other Merfolk that are in Rivals of Ixalan. We have Giltgrove Stalker, which is a nice little creature that can be evasive. Not a bad place to put +1/+1 counters if that's what you're doing. Jadecraft Artisan, I think, is a very good common. It's the kind of card that any deck will want, but you get some extra mileage out of it because it's also a Merfolk. The fact that it can pump a creature and make it easier to attack through your opponent's board is awesome. Mistcloaked Herald is not a card I love. I actually think it's a little better in maybe a raid-centric deck, which we'll talk about later, than it is in an actual Merfolk deck. But it's another place that it's a nice place to put +1/+1 counters. River Darter isn't anything special, but it is a somewhat evasive Merfolk. Riverwise Augur I love a lot. It's just going to, give you a lot of card advantage and excellent card selection while bringing that useful creature type. There's also Sworn Guardian. This is sort of like the bottom of the barrel as far as Merfolk playables go. Maybe Mistcloaked Herald is, but they're both pretty mediocre. But you'll play them if you have like 3 Merfolk Lords or other Merfolk Payoffs. And I think the best of all of these, whether common or uncommon, is Jungleborn Pioneer. It gives you 2 bodies, which is good with the Lord, first of all, good with other Merfolk Payoffs, and good with Ascend. And these kinds of cards have always shown us time and time again that they're good and limited. So as you can see, Merfolk are still pretty aggressive. They're all pretty low on the curve. They're all about, attacking the opponent hard and quickly. Those are the Merfolk and the Merfolk Payoffs within Rivals of Ixalan, but remember, again, the last pack will be just of regular Ixalan. So let's look at some of the key Ixalan cards you'll want to round out your Merfolk deck. There is, of course, Deeproot Warrior, which I think is a better 2-drop than basically any of the ones we just talked about, so it's one you'll be interested in. There's also Deeproot Waters, which I think got a boost thanks to the fact that there's a Merfolk Lord now. If you have 10 or 11 Merfolk and a couple Merfolk Lords, you definitely want to be playing Deeproot Waters. There's Jade Guardian, which puts +1/+1 counters on things. Also, of course, great with auras. River Herald's Boon was a really key card in the deck when it was triple Ixalan, and it'll still be very good here. It's just an excellent combat trick when you have Merfolk. It's just so efficient. River Sneak is also good. You know, it gets bigger when you play a Merfolk. It works well with Deep Root Waters. It works well with, you know, any of those cards that pump Merfolk, and you're going to be playing Merfolk pretty regularly and doing some damage. Shaper Apprentice was another very good 2-drop for the deck that I think is probably also better than any of the 2-drop Merfolk that are actually in Rivals of Ixalan. It, you know, gains flying if you happen to have another Merfolk. There's also Shapers of Nature, which was the signpost uncommon in triple Ixalan. It's still good here, but there are fewer +1/+1 counters floating around now than there were in the original triple Ixalan format, because we don't have commons like Jade Guardian and River Herald's Boon in 3 packs. We only have them in 2. Not to mention an uncommon like Vine Shaper Mystic, who's also very strong and puts +1/+1 counters on Merfolk. There are also some rares that are obviously best suited for the Merfolk deck. Kumena, Tyrant of Orazca, is one of the more obvious ones. Obviously, he just loves having a bunch of Merfolk in play and can turn them into all sorts of advantages. There's also Jade Light Ranger, who's just a really good card in any deck, honestly, but it does happen to be a Merfolk. Deeproot Elite, which is only going to be good in a Merfolk deck. Another place where you do see +1/+1 counters, but note that it's on a rare card. And Seafloor Oracle, which is also great, but only in a Merfolk deck. That's true. 3 of the 4 of these are only going to be good in a Merfolk deck anyway. Jade Light Ranger, good everywhere. But these are the rares you'll be looking at. There are, of course, also good rares in Ixalan that you would be happy to have too, but we're not going to talk about those here. So you're not going to see them nearly as frequently as you will commons and uncommons. So that's Merfolk. You know, it's basically the same deck that it was. A little less +1/+1 counter centric, but it's still an aggressive deck with, you know, some evasiveness and, you know, powerful creatures. Next, we'll look at the other tribe that occupies only a single color pair, which is vampires. And that's black-white. And it's a lot like the blue-green color pair. Basically, you just get a Lord this time around. It'll pump all your vampires. I think this one's actually a little bit better because of the presence of 1/1 lifelink vampire tokens in the format. You can go a little wider more frequently, I feel like, with vampires than you can with Merfolk, although that may be less true in the new format. We did look at a few cards that make Merfolk tokens when they come into play. First, let's look at the vampire payoffs and Rivals of Ixalan, in addition to our friend Legion Lieutenant here. There is Arterial Flow, which isn't a card that I love. It is, like, you know, lower tier playable. It does get better in Two-Headed Giant if your pre-release happens to be Two-Headed Giant, though. There's Sadistic Sky Marcher, which is very good. It happens to cost less if you have vampires. A 3-mana 2/2 with flying and lifelink is great, and if that's what it's going to be most of the time, you definitely want it. Voracious Vampire, I think, is maybe the key common at making a vampire deck good in this format, because when it comes into play, it pumps and gives evasiveness to one of your vampires who's already in play, and it comes with evasiveness as well. There's the white Forerunner of the Legion, which lets you search your library for a vampire, and then when you play a vampire, you get to do not a +1/+1 counter, but pump a creature until end of turn, and that gets even better when you're doing vampire tokens. Sanguine Glorifier, along with Voracious Vampire, these are both pretty key commons, I think, for the deck. They both come down, have an immediate impact on the board, and leave behind decent stats, and I like both of them. And so that's the vampire payoffs in the set. The 2 common ones are really good. The uncommon ones, especially Sky Marcher and Forerunner, are good, but you're definitely going to see Sanguine Glorifier and Voracious Vampire a lot more regularly and be getting multiple copies of them and feel pretty happy about it if your deck is deep in vampires. Let's look at the vampires in the set that, you know, aren't vampire payoffs. We have Exultant Sky Marcher, which just is an efficient attacker in the air. We have Famished Paladin, which brings me to sort of a minor sub-theme within the vampire deck, and that is life gain. Famished Paladin is an incredibly efficient creature, but he doesn't untap unless you gain life. So gaining life is a sub-theme within the vampire deck. We saw that a little bit. We saw Exultant Sky Marcher, who has lifelink, for example. We already saw that, but you're going to see more things that gain you life right here as well. Legion Conquistador is back. He's in all 3 packs. Getting multiple copies of him is great, especially with the Lord, because they help you go really wide. Martyr of Dusk is a nice little 2-drop that leaves behind a lifelink token, so there's a little more life gain. Sky Marcher Aspirant is a nice early game aggressive creature that gains flying if you manage to ascend in the late game. Squire's Devotion is a solid little aura that gives you a vampire creature token with lifelink. Once again, that works with Famished Paladin. Dusk Legion Zealot is Black Elvish Visionary, basically. Draws you a card and you lose 1 life when it comes into play. Oathsworn Vampire is the other card that cares about life gain at common or uncommon. He can be especially annoying for your opponent because he just keeps coming back from the graveyard. Anytime you gain life, you can decide to bring him back from your graveyard, and that's pretty nice. You do have to pay for him, by the way. And there's also Vampire Revenant, which is admittedly nothing special, the least interesting of all the cards on this list, but if you need some vampires, you could do a lot worse than Vampire Revenant. So now let's look at the key cards in Ixalan that'll help you round out your vampire deck. We've got Duskborn Skymarcher, a nice little payoff from the set. Anointed Deacon, which turned out to be like the defining card, at least at common or uncommon, of the vampire decks in Triple Ixalan. It was great at pumping the evasive vampires, of which we just saw several, and it was also good at pumping vampire tokens, of which we saw a few. Bishop of the Bloodstain pays you off for going wide with vampires by doing 1 damage to your opponent for each one. Call to the Feast was the black-white signpost uncommon in Triple Ixalan, and you still like it here. It gives you 3/1/1 vampire creature tokens, obviously in combination with the Lord, that's great. Deathless Ancient, another nice payoff for going wide. It gives you a large flying threat that happens to be a vampire who also does not have much interest in staying dead. Vampire Zeal is a nice combat trick in any white deck, but it's even better here where obviously your creatures are mostly going to be vampires. So let's look at the rares that support this archetype. We've got Champion of Dusk, which is an excellent card no matter what, but in this deck it's absolutely insane. So if you see him, like if you're through pack 1 and you're like, yeah, I got 2 of the black-white signpost in common and like 5 other vampires, and you see Champion of Dusk, you were going to be very happy. It's just an insane card in the vampire deck. Drawing a bunch of cards is great. You do lose some life, but you can play it in a way that keeps you from killing yourself, obviously, without too much effort. Twilight Prophet isn't really like a vampire payoff or anything. It's just a really good vampire who in the late game can help you ascend. And with vampire tokens, that's not impossible to do. If you do ascend in the late game, its ability is ridiculous and can just win you the game single-handedly. Bishop of Binding is another card that's just good in any deck. That's kind of the downside here for the vampire deck. All 3 of the rares and mythics we've looked at so far are good in any deck of those colors. They're not going to be the kind of rare that you get because no one else is in vampires. Because Bishop of Binding exiles something when it comes into play, and it can pump a vampire, usually itself, whenever it attacks. Radiant Destiny, I think, is at its best here. There's really only 2 tribes in white. There's, of course, vampires, but there is also dinosaurs. But the vampire deck is smaller. It's going to play more small creatures. It has creature tokens running around. So Radiant Destiny, I think, is at its best here. That's another card, though, that people will first pick and just try to be in a tribe, and it'll go pretty well. Paladin of Atonement is a card that's a little bit better here than anywhere else. It gets bigger very quickly. It gains you life. Those are all things vampires are interested in, and it's a vampire. Then, of course, there's Elenda, the Dark Rose, which is sort of a mythic signpost card who, whenever creatures die, gets bigger, leaves vampire tokens behind with lifelink, and she herself has lifelink, and obviously those things all work very well within the vampire deck. So now that we've looked at the 2 color pairs that just have 1 tribe within them, we're going to look at both pirates and dinosaurs who occupy 3 different 2 color pairs. The first of those is pirates. The Grixis shard has a lot of pirates in it, and before we get into the unique identity of each of the color pairs within it, I thought I would include the Pirate Payoffs together at common and uncommon, as they're going to be good in basically any version of the deck. There aren't actually that many Pirate Payoffs in Rivals of Ixalan alone, which is interesting, and not at lower rarities anyway, but these are them. Sea Legs, is a nice flexible card if you're a pirate deck. Forerunner of the Coalition is obviously not the black Forerunner, the Pirate Forerunner rather, that lets you search your library for pirate, put it on top, and whenever you play a pirate, your opponent loses 1 life. Fathom Fleet Border is less of a payoff and more of, it just becomes a good card instead of a medium card if you have another pirate. And Daring Buccaneer is a very efficient creature if you happen to have a pirate in your hand. Let's also talk about the payoffs that are in the 1 Ixalan pack 2 before we get into talking about each color pair. So we have cards like Fathom Fleet Firebrand, Fiery Cannonade, Headstrong Brute, Lightning Rig Crew, March of the Drowned, Pirate's Cutlass, which is one of the biggest keys, and Lookout's Dispersal. Of these, I would say Lightning Rig Crew and Pirate's Cutlass were probably the most defining of the format in Triple Ixalan. There's also Dire Fleet Captain, who was the black-red signpost uncommon, and the only pirate signpost uncommon from the other set that had sort of a tribal bonus. So now that we've looked at the Ixalan cards and the rivals of Ixalan cards that like it when you play Pirates, let's look at the individual color pairs within Rivals of Ixalan, and while they're all about Pirates, what they're interested in doing other than that. So in red-black, it's more of an aggro deck, just like it was in the last set. As you can see, we have Direfleet Neckbreaker here as our signpost uncommon. Making all of your attacking pirates get +2/+0 is insane, especially if you can just curve out, like 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop. Direfleet Neckbreaker, attack with 3 pirates. That's going to be something that happens that just gets pretty close to ending a game. So let's look at the pirates that are more well suited for this deck than for the others, the ones that are more aggressive. Some examples are Buccaneer's Bravado, which obviously enough isn't actually a pirate, but it's a great combat trick and going to be at its best in a more aggressive deck, and it has a pirate upside. Daring Buccaneer we already saw, but I think this is probably the best home for it. Fanatical Firebrand, a nice little hasty pirate who also can sacrifice itself to do damage later, but it's a nice 1-drop to play along with the Buccaneer if you're going to try to curve into the Neckbreaker. Goblin Trailblazer, a little pirate with Menace, can get in for some damage early. Adding Menace to a creature who's getting pumped by the Neckbreaker is obviously very good. Stormfleet Swashbuckler is a nice little 2-mana creature, a 2-mana 2/2, who in the late game gains double strike if you manage to get the City's Blessing. Swaggering Corsair has Raid, so it's also good in the more raid-centric pirate deck, which we'll talk about momentarily. But it's also good here where if you're trying to curve out, you're going to play him as a 3-mana 3/3 pretty easily. Dinosaur Hunter, just a nice little 2-mana 2/2 with some upside. We, of course, have the Forerunner, which I think is good in basically any one of these decks, at least the 2 that have black in them, but it's good here because you're trying to play as many small, cheap vampires as possible, or pirates as possible, and it can find you your signpost uncommon that can just end the game. So, like, you can go turn 1 Buccaneer, turn 2 Trailblazer, turn 3 Forerunner, and then turn 4 Neckbreaker, and that's pretty scary because the Forerunner will grab you the Neckbreaker. There's also Grasping Scoundrel, another 1-drop that can help you curve into those ridiculous starts. Fathom Fleet Border, which we already saw. It's good. It's fine in any black pirate deck, but probably at its best here, where you're just trying to be as aggressive as possible. There are some rares that are best suited, perhaps, for this deck, but probably good in any pirate deck. And those are Captain's Hook, which can give Menace. Direfleet Daredevil, which is just a ridiculous card. It's like a red version of Snapcaster Mage. Lets you steal an opponent's spell from their graveyard, but it's also just a good aggressive creature. And Direfleet Poisoner, which has a Pirate Payoff and is quite strong, obviously. So those are the rares that are well suited for this deck. Now, let's move to the next pirate color pair, which is blue-black, where our signpost uncommon is a little more interesting. It's Deadeye Brawler. It's a 4-mana 2/4 with Death Touch and Ascend, and when you have Ascended, when it hits an opponent, you get to draw a card, and that is pretty nice. So this color pair in the last set, blue-black, was more about treasure and artifacts, but treasure and artifacts are harder to come by in this set than they were in Triple Ixalan. There's just not as much of it going around. This color pair, though, is about ascending, and treasure can help you with that. It's also just about playing pirates and having some of the pirate payoffs we've already talked about. But it's less tribal than the black-red one, who is really saying, play as many pirates as you can in your deck, whereas Deadeye Brawler is sort of saying, let's be a blue-black deck that cares about Ascend, maybe cares a little bit about pirates, and, that's kind of what this is. It's obviously a less aggressive color pair than black-red, but it's still a creature-based color pair. But first, let's look at the cards with Ascend in blue and black. There are a lot of them at common and uncommon, and I don't think that is a coincidence. We have, for example, Expel from Orazca, which is a great card on its own, but if you can Ascend with it, it gets to be insane. It becomes a 2-mana Time Ebb, which is nuts. Secrets of the Golden City becomes a 3-mana draw 3 if you've Ascended. Slippery Scoundrel happens to be a pirate, so obviously it's extra well suited here. And it becomes unblockable and gains hexproof, which is obviously a huge problem for your opponent if you Ascend. Mausoleum Harpy I'm less excited about, but it does get better when you Ascend, and it's a black card. Spire Winder is another card that's not ultra exciting, but if you do manage to Ascend quickly, it's a 4-mana 3/4 flyer. Dusk Charger, sort of the same thing, kind of underwhelming, but if you're Ascending quickly, it can be pretty good for you. So, what are the means of Ascending that blue and black have? Well, they have a few of them. Sailor of Means gives you a treasure, so it contributes 2 permanents. Sea Legs I have here because and Water Knot because they're auras that will stay on the battlefield even if they've shut down your opponent's creature, so they contribute to your They contribute to your number of permanents. And Pitiless Plunderer makes sure that you keep permanents on the battlefield even when your creatures are dying. But as I said, treasure is much less emphasized here. This Sailor of Means and Pitiless Plunderer are the only two cards at lower rarities in this color pair anyway, that make treasure. And that's a big difference from Ixalan. So I think for this deck to really get good at ascending, it needs to find some key cards in Ixalan, many of which are pirates that happen to make treasure, because they really contribute to you ascending quickly. So let's look at some of the key Ixalan cards. One of them is Contract Killing. So this is a kill spell that adds 2 permanents to the board for you, and that's great. Deadeye Plunderers loves it when you have a bunch of treasures in play, and it can make them, making the number of permanents you have increase. Direfleet Hoarder leaves a permanent behind even if you trade with it. Lookout's Dispersal doesn't really help you ascend, but it's a good counterspell if you're in a pirate deck. Prosperous Pirates gives you 3 permanents with 1 card, and that's nice. Ruthless Knave can really just turn into an engine. I think this card actually got a lot better because it's so good at getting you to ascending quickly. You give up 1 creature and you create 2 treasures, and you can do this a few times and quickly get to the point where you have ascended. Let's look at some rares that are well suited for this deck. Obviously those with Ascend are like Vona's Hunger, which obviously is way better when you've ascended. Twilight Prophet, who we already saw. Direfleet Poisoner is just good in any pirate deck. Kumena's Awakening we haven't seen yet. You know, if you can ascend and this just turns into a card drawing engine, you're just going to win the game. And Time Stream Navigator, another ridiculous payoff for this, and it happens to be a pirate, so you can search it up with your Forerunner, for example, and start taking extra turns. Well, you only get to do it once, usually, unless you've managed to mill your entire deck, which obviously would be a lot of fun, but it is a very strong payoff for Ascend. So that's blue-black. It's still a pirate deck. It has some pirate payoffs, but it's also interested in ascending. There's lots of quality commons and uncommons with Ascend in the color pair, including your Signpost uncommon. So now let's move to the final pirate color pair, which is blue-red, where our Signpost uncommon is Stormfleet Sprinter, a 3-mana 2/2 with haste who can't be blocked. So the blue-red color pair is really about aggro too, but it's about it in sort of a, I don't know, a more nuanced way. It's about raiding. The raid mechanic is found the most in blue and red in this set. And so you don't necessarily just want to be swinging with your whole board. You want to be swinging with evasive creatures and getting value out of raid triggers. And Stormfleet Sprinter, for example, helps you do that. It's just going to trigger raid forever because it can attack forever, you know, until your opponent kills it. It's also very good with auras, and it's also very good with Pirate's Cutlass, which of course was a key card for Pirates in Triple Ixalan. So let's look at the cards with raid in Rivals of Ixalan at common and uncommon. We have Deadeye Rig Hauler, which is quite good. In a world where your creatures are unblockable or hard to block, you can play this post-combat and bounce something just to gain a huge tempo advantage. Siren Reaver happens to be a pirate, happens to fly too, so it helps you trigger raid. But if you can trigger raid early, it's a 3-mana 3/2 flyer, which will quickly run away with the game. We saw Swaggering Corsair already. It's another guy with raid. He gets better when you can raid consistently. There's also an interesting pair of auras that I think are sort of like an additional sort of signposts. There are a pair of signpost uncommons, and those are Sea Red and Curious Obsession. They're both auras that give nice, high-quality boosts for the amount of mana they ask of you, and if you don't attack, you have to sacrifice the auras. So it's really saying, you know, make sure if you're in this color pair that you're going to be attacking a lot so you can hold on to these powerful auras. And so, you know, that's sort of an additional sign that this color pair is about raiding. Worth noting, though, that there are only 3 cards with raid at common or uncommon. Granted, Deadeye Rig Hauler and Swaggering Corsair are both common, and they're both very good, so getting multiple copies of them isn't hard. And, of course, there's also the Pack of Ixalan, which we'll talk about later. So some cards that help you enable raid in this set, you know, these are low-curve creatures who aren't easy to block, are cards like Goblin Trailblazer, Mist-Cloaked Herald, and Kitesail Corsair. Obviously, any creature with flying or menace or whatever is good, but these are some of the key ones. Obviously, the pirate ones are a little better because if you have some pirate payoffs, obviously, you know, you'd rather have pirates than the merfolk. So as I mentioned, within Ixalan, there's a lot more raiding going on, and there's some key cards there that you want to pick up to really feel like you've gotten there on this raid sub-theme. First of all, there's the Signpost uncommon from the set, which is a continuous raid trigger. It doesn't just matter once like most. It lets you loot every single time you manage to raid in a turn. There's Rigging Runner, who sort of serves double duty. You can play him as a 1-drop who allows you to get raid, or you can play him a little later as a 2/2. It's also not bad in the black-red deck when you're just trying to curve out and smash your opponent's face in. Shipwreck Looter gives you a nice little loot effect when it raids. Stormfleet Aerialist, sort of like the Rigging Runner, performs double duty. You can play it as a 2-mana 1/2 flyer to help you trigger raid, and if you manage to trigger raid for it on turn 2, you get to play a 2-mana 2/3 flyer. Stormfleet Pyromancer is a card that I think people constantly underrated in the last format, and I kind of hope they continue to. It's just a great card because when it comes into play, it's going to kill something. Lots of small creatures in this format, and then it can easily trade with something. That is, of course, if you raid, but raiding isn't that hard. There's also Stormfleet Spy, who draws you a card. I realized just now as I'm, doing this video, I left out Siren's Ruse, which also works quite well with raid because raid all has enter the battlefield triggers. And it's a pirate payoff that I probably should have mentioned earlier, but that's obviously a card you should keep in mind when building any pirate deck, but it may be at its best here. So what are some of the rares that are good for this deck? Well, there are 3 of them, I think. Warkite Marauder is going to be good in any blue deck. It's just an insanely aggressive creature that can just get in for a bunch of damage while enabling the rest of your board to attack. Admiral's Order I'm sort of underwhelmed by, but it is nice that you can counter your opponent's destroy target attacking creature spell with it for only 1 blue mana. And Direfleet Daredevil is just a nice little attacker who lets you steal spells. We already saw it. It's good in any red deck, but it is a pirate, so I thought I would include it here. So those are the 3 pirate color pairs. You have the black-red color pair, which is very interested in just curving out with as many pirates as possible. It is the most tribal, I would say, of the 3. You have black-blue, which is probably the least tribal, but it's interested in pirates, it's interested in ascending. And then you have blue-red, which is interested in both pirates and triggering raid as frequently as you can to get all the value you possibly can out of your cards. So now let's move to the 3 colors that dinosaurs appear in and talk about the dinosaur payoffs within Rivals of Ixalan. Those colors are, of course, green, white, and red. So just like we did with pirates, we're going to look at the payoffs for doing a dinosaur deck up front. And those are, for example, Majestic Heliopterus, which is great. When it attacks, you can give another dinosaur flying, which of course making your 4/4 dinosaur fly is awesome. It's also Sun-Crested Pterodon, who has vigilance, provided you control another dinosaur. Brings some nice stats to the table, as well as obviously flying. Forerunner of the Empire is the Dinosaur Forerunner. It lets you search your library, as they all do, and put the dinosaur on top of your library. And it has the ability to do 1 damage to each creature whenever you play a dinosaur. It is a May ability, which is nice, because sometimes you don't want to do that, either because you'll trigger your opponent's Enrage or kill your own guys. Stampeding Horncrest has haste if you have another dinosaur. Cherished Hatchling is, along with Majestic Heliopterus, they're very good uncommons for the deck. It makes it so all of your dinosaurs not only fight when they come into play, but also have flash. So it's a huge pain for your opponent to have to deal with, have to play around. The more dinosaurs you have, the better. Knight of the Stampede makes it so your dinosaur spells cost 2 less. And Thunderherd Migration, is the card, we saw the cycle of, we've seen some cards in the cycle already that are of a creature type, and if you reveal a certain card of the same creature type, you get to play the card for its printed cost instead of having to pay additional mana. Well, the dinosaurs didn't get a dinosaur that did that. They get a Rampant Growth, basically, that does that. There are also a couple of rares that are best suited for the dinosaur deck, and those are Temple Altasaur and Radiant Destiny. I did say Radiant Destiny is probably best suited for vampires, but it also works here. If you end up with enough dinosaurs, it's a nice little card to have. So now let's look at each of the dinosaur color pairs and what each of them is most interested in doing. In green-white, our signpost uncommon is Atsukan Seer, who can ramp you and fix you and return dinosaurs from your graveyard to your hand. Those are all good things. This color pair, I think, is more about ramp than the others. There are several cards at common and uncommon that help you ramp in these color pair, like Cacophodon, which if Enrage lets you untap permanents, including lands. Knight of the Stampede, who we already saw, who makes dinosaurs cost less. Thunderherd Migration, which we already saw, who helps you ramp and fix. Orazca Relic is a card that we haven't seen yet that helps you ramp, and in the late game it can actually do other things, which is nice. Enter the Unknown lets you play additional lands, so that's nice. There's also cards, of course, in Ixalan that help you ramp, but we'll talk about those in a second. There are a lot of dinos worth ramping into, like Colossal Dreadmaw, Crested Herdcaller, who's, an awesome uncommon anyway, Overgrown Armasaur, Majestic Heliopterus, Sun-Crested Pterodon. Those are all cards that if you play them early as possible are going to be better. The key cards in Ixalan are the ones that help you ramp, and the dinosaur payoffs as well. Blossom Dryad, I think, is going to be better now. Commune with Dinosaurs, I think, is going to be better now too. It helps you find a land if that's what you need, or a big dinosaur if that's what you need. Drover of the Mighty was already great. I think it's even better now because it fixes for you and ramps for you, and there is a little more support for that now. Kinjali's Collar makes your dinosaur spells cost less as well. New Horizons is very good because it makes one of your creatures bigger, and it lets you ramp and fix. And it works really well with Blossom Dryad. That may be something you experienced some in Ixalan, but it was less reliable in Ixalan because the format was so fast. There's also Ranging Raptors, who, when enraged, search your library for your basic land card. There's also Savage Stomp, which is just a great removal spell for dinosaurs. Just a good payoff in this set in general for dinosaurs. What rares are best supported for this deck? I think Trapjaw Tyrant is a great thing to ramp into. Basically, this color pair, because it has so much ramping going on in it, any big dinosaur is worth playing to some extent. I even think if there's a deck that plays Atalpa Primal Dawn, this is it. If there's a deck for Galta, which probably is any green deck, but this deck will be able to play him even more quickly, this is it. Wayward Swordtooth lets you play additional lands. I don't love the card a whole lot because of its problems of being useless until you ascend, but hey, if you're ramping, getting more lands in play, and playing auras and stuff, then you will ascend eventually. World Shaper is a Merfolk, but I think it's best suited here because its goal is to help you ramp. There is a green-white gold card, but it's actually kind of underwhelming. I included it here just in the interest of showing you that it's here. It doesn't help you ramp. It is a nice little 2-drop, but it's not much else. And if there's any deck that can play Zakama Primal Calamity, this is it. This deck has a lot of ramping, a lot of fixing. It can get to 9 mana. If any deck can. So if you first pick a Zakama Primal Calamity, make sure you're prioritizing the ramping spells we just talked about. Huatli Radiant Champion doesn't bring you any sort of special synergy. It's just a good Planeswalker, and it's in this color pair. So that's green-white. It's about ramping. Let's see what red-green's about. So the next dinosaur color pair is red-green, where our signpost uncommon is Raging Regisaur, a 4-mana 4/4 who, when it attacks, gets to do 1 damage to something, creatures or players. And red-green in the last set sort of had an Enrage sub-theme, and it has the same thing going on here. Raging Regisaur is nice in that it enables you, if you want to kill a small creature, or you could target one of your own creatures with Enrage and get a nice Enrage trigger. It's also just got a very efficient body for what it is. Let's look at the commons and uncommons that have Enrage, all of which are dinosaurs in Ixalan, Rivals of Ixalan, rather. These are the only cards, common or uncommon, that have Enrage in Rivals of Ixalan. Frilled Death Spitter isn't anything special, but if you can get some extra value out of it, obviously it's going to kill your opponent more quickly. Needletooth Raptor is the kind where if you can poke it a bunch for 1 damage, it's just going to dominate a game. Cacophodon is a little less interesting. It can help you ramp, I guess. It can also sort of give your guy vigilance or whatever. If you do damage to it enough times, obviously you can untap a bunch of stuff, and that might be kind of fun. Overgrown Armasaur just builds you an army of Saprolings, which, of course, is also nice. This is a small set, so even though there's only 2 commons and 2 uncommons that really work with Enrage, you're going to see them frequently enough, and Needletooth Raptor, I think, is going to be the one you want the most. Let's look at some of the ways you can trigger Enrage within red-green. Cherished Hatchling is just a great card for the dinosaur deck. We saw it earlier, but I think it's especially worth noting here because it makes it so all of your dinosaurs gain the ability to fight when they come into play until end of turn. So if you play a Cacophodon or a Needletooth Raptor and you fight something with it, you're going to get the Enrage trigger that turn as well. Hunt the Weak is a fight card, makes your guy bigger, which also means you can hit it harder with something to make it enraged. And so you get to fight and kill something and get an Enrage trigger, and that's pretty nice. Tilonali's Crown is one I'm a little less impressed with. It does have some flexibility because you can use it to kill one of your opponent's X1s, or you can put it on one of your guys, make it bigger, and get an Enrage trigger. I just don't like the stats boost it gives all that much, but hey, if you have a bunch of Enrage in your deck, Tilonali's Crown is not a bad place to turn. Shake the Foundations, if you have a bunch of Enrage, seems like a lot of fun. It'll also kill a lot of smaller creatures while cantripping. It's also an instant, so that's nice. Reckless Rage, this is basically like the deck for it. It's just such a good removal spell in this deck and so mediocre in most of the other decks that it's the kind of a card that if you see it, this deck is probably pretty open, or there weren't that many Enrage cards open. So you can use it to kill one of your opponent's creatures, get an Enrage trigger out of one of your guys, and that's pretty nice. Forerunner of the Empire not only searches your library for a dinosaur, the fact that it does 1 to the whole board when you want it to means you can trigger multiple Enrages at the same time. Let's look at some of the Ixalan cards that are key. There are more cards, of course, with Enrage in Ixalan. Atsukan Archer, we've seen before, obviously in Ixalan, and it can fight your own guys to trigger Enrage if you want to. I have Charging Monstersaur here. It doesn't have Enrage or anything, but it's just a big, scary dinosaur. It was one of the best cards in the whole set of any rarity, and it's going to be good in this deck, and in any red deck, really. Drover of the Mighty, we've seen, it helps you ramp. Otapek Huntmaster also helps you ramp and give things haste. The red-green Signpost Uncommon in Ixalan also goes well with Enrage in that it does 1 damage to the whole board in addition to just being a huge dinosaur with trample. Ranging Raptors does have Enrage, and when it gets enraged, you get to search your library for a land. Raptor Hatchling, when it gets enraged, gives you a 3/3 dinosaur token. Ravenous Daggertooth gains you some life. Ryle is a card that never really panned out for me in Rivals, in Triple Ixalan. Maybe it will here. Maybe there's enough new cards with Enrage for it to, but most of the time it didn't seem worth playing to me. But it is a way to enable Enrage for a little bit of value. Savage Stomp is, great. It's a great removal spell in any dinosaur deck, but in this case, you can use it to Enrage on one of your Enraged creatures. And I didn't include all of the creatures with Enrage here. There are some others, but these are the ones that I think are the most playable. So let's go ahead and look at the rares in Rivals of Ixalan for this color pair. They're both cards with Enrage, Silverclad, Ferocidons, and Polyraptor. Keep in mind, by the way, that if you have the Forerunner, the red Forerunner, and Polyraptor in play, you can actually create an infinite combo that blows up basically the entire board while giving you infinite Polyraptors. So people are really excited about that, and maybe that has some legs in Constructed somewhere, but I don't know. Polyraptor still costs 8 mana, so that's kind of an insane thing to ask. But if you get to pull that off in Limited, that'll be a lot of fun. There's obviously other rares in Ixalan, too, that have Enrage, like Ripjaw Raptor and things that are just going to be good in this deck as well. Let's look at the last color pair that is Dinosaur-y. It's also the least tribal-y of the 3, though, and that is Red-White, which is more of a red-white aggro deck that has sort of a dinosaur sub-theme rather than a, dinosaur deck that, a dinosaur deck at its heart. The Signpost Uncommon here is Relentless Raptor, a 2-mana 3/3 with Vigilance, which is awesome. But it's actually my least favorite of all the Signpost Uncommons. I think it's just the worst of them, despite those awesome stats, because it has to attack or block each combat if able, so it's just going to die very quickly. If you can back it up with removal and combat tricks and auras, it gets to be a little bit better, and we're going to see that that's what this color pair, a lot of what it wants to do, as is often the case for red-white. Let's look at the aggressive creatures that are going to be at their best in red-white from Rivals of Ixalan. I'm not only looking at dinosaurs here, keep that in mind, because this deck is the least tribal of them all. We've got Frill Deathspitter, who we saw earlier. We've also got Goblin Trailblazer, who we saw in the Pirate deck, but he fits here too. Same with Stormfleet Swashbuckler, same with Swaggering Corsair. There's also Everdawn Champion, a creature that just can't die in combat, and so if you can start putting auras on it or give it an evasive ability, it gets to be really good. Martyr of Dusk, we've seen it too, just a nice little 2-drop. Raptor Companion is back. Skymarcher Aspirant we've seen. Sun Sentinel, nothing special, but it is a nice 2-drop. Exultant Skymarcher, we saw in the Vampire deck, good here too. Fanatical Firebrand, saw it in the Pirate deck, good here too. So red and white have a real critical mass of good 1, 2, and 3 drops that you're just going to want to curve out with, and that's really what this deck wants to be doing. You'll note not very many of these cards are actually dinosaurs, so the dinosaur theme isn't like super prevalent here, just once again to get that across. So to support, sort of this aggro theme, one thing you really want are combat tricks, another thing you really want are efficient removal spells, and another thing still are good auras. Those are all the sorts of things that make an aggro deck really be able to just run over an opponent. So Baffling End, which is good, and obviously any white deck is good here just because it gets rid of an early blocker and lets you go to town. Moment of Triumph is a nice combat trick, gains you a bit of life, and gives a very good stats boost for the mana cost. Pride of Conquerors will be good here. It'll also be good in the Vampire deck, really, but it'll be good here because you're just trying to play as many creatures as you can, and it can just end the game for you, especially if you manage to get the City's Blessing. Squire's Devotion, Lifelink is really strong, when you're trying to race an opponent, and makes it very difficult for your opponent to beat you. So if you're making like a 4/4 Lifelink with this, it really creates problems for them. It also gives you a vampire token, which doesn't hurt. Buccaneer's Bravado is obviously a better combat trick in a pirate-heavy deck, but as we saw, there are pirates that fit into this deck. Sea Red is an aura we saw earlier. It fits in here as well as in the raid deck. Tealanali's Crown I have here in interest of sort of including like as the most aggressive aura of all of them. If you can really go to town with this thing and just blow your opponent's blockers out of the way with combat tricks and removal spells, Tealanali's Crown does get to be pretty scary. I don't like it as much as really any of these other cards that we're talking about here. I'd rather have these combat tricks or the more powerful auras like Squire's Devotion or Sea Red. There are some key cards in Ixalan for this deck, just like really good 2-drops like Adanto Vanguard, which I think is probably still the best non-rare 2-drop in the entire format. It's great in a vampire deck, but obviously you'll play it here too. Bishop Soldier, solid 2-drop. Bonded Horncrest fits in well here, and it is a dinosaur actually, just because you're going to be attacking all the time, and so he's not going to be alone very often. Charging Monster Sword, good here, and basically every red deck. Imperial Aerosaur is nice, being able to throw one of your guys into the air to attack the turn it comes into play and then start attacking. Lightning Strike gives you an efficient removal spell. The red-white Signpost and Common from Triple Ixalan is of course good here too. With both Flying and Menace, it's difficult to block. Territorial Hammerskull was the best white common in Ixalan, and it's still going to be very good here. It really enables you to just rapidly destroy your opponent, attack them early. And there's also Tealanali's Knight, who gets a boost if you have dinosaurs and becomes a 3/3 when it attacks. So those are the dinosaur archetypes. Those are all the tribal archetypes in general. There are 2 more archetypes who actually got Signposts and Commons this time that didn't get them in Triple Ixalan. So let's go ahead and jump into those. First up, we have Black-Green. So Black-Green Signpost Uncommon is Jungle Creeper. At first glance, you would think that this card means an Explore deck was what Black-Green is pushing you towards, as was true in Ixalan. But once you actually look at the cards, there's a lot less Explore in this set at lower rarities within Black and Green, and there's only one card that has Explored either Uncommon or Common. So Explore isn't as heavy of a theme here for Black-Green like it was in Triple Ixalan, so then maybe you'd think it's a deck about the graveyard. But again, there really isn't much graveyard interaction at lower rarities within Rivals of Ixalan either. In the end, I think Black-Green is mostly just a good stuff deck and is dependent on some key cards in Ixalan for it to become a deck that has more synergy, especially around Explore. Being a good stuff deck isn't a bad place to be, but in a format with a lot of synergy, it does seem like it might be a little bit of a problem. So just to show you, the only 2 cards that sort of synergize well with that Signpost Uncommon are Enter the Unknown, which lets you explore and play a land more quickly, and Recover, which can return cards from your graveyard to your hand. There aren't anything else in these 2 colors at lower rarities that interacts with the graveyard or anything like that. And so that's kind of weird. It makes Jungle Creeper feel a little bit off. But there are a lot of cards in Ixalan that work well with Jungle Creeper, so we'll look at those too. So Explore was the big sort of theme, the unifying theme in Black-Green without a Signpost in Common last time around, and that was because of the existence of both Lurking Chupacabra and Wildgrowth Walker, and the fact that more creatures with Explore existed in the color pair than in any other color pair. And both of those are still going to be good here. You're going to have access to more Explore cards than anyone else still, and so for that reason, they're both still going to be good here. The good news is you can kind of get to the 3rd pack and realize whether or not Black-Green is open enough for you to try to make these decks, whereas in Triple Ixalan you kind of had to jump on these early to really have a good shot at building an Explore deck. When you did, it was fun, but it was hard to do. So other creatures with Explore that work well with the Jungle Creeper, because you can just put the Creeper in the graveyard and get it back if you want to later in the game, are cards like Tashana's Wayfinder, Seeker's Squire, Merfolk Branchwalker, Ixali's Diviner, Direfleet Interloper. Those are the kinds of Explore cards that can sort of make this deck more synergistic, but a lot of the time it's just not really going to work out, at least not with commons and uncommons. There are some rares that make things a little bit better. There's the rare flip card, Journey to Eternity, which returns a dead creature to the battlefield immediately when that creature dies, and then transforms into Atzal, Cave of Eternity, which lets you return creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. There's also Tomb Robber, who works well both because it explores and because you can do stuff like discard your Jungle Creeper over and over again for the Explore trigger, which, you need a lot of mana to do it, but that is kind of a fun thing to do. Path of Discovery is awesome. It gives Explore to your whole team, and if you're really doing that, then Jungle Creeper actually does become good. There's also Jade Light Ranger, who explores twice when it comes into play. But overall, despite having a new Signpost uncommon, I think this color pair seems a bit lost, at least in instances where you don't pick up a key rare or the nice Explore build-arounds in Pack 3. It is the kind of color pair you will play when it's open enough, just because you're going to be getting like good removal and good creatures, but not one you will be doing on a regular basis, because you're going to be wanting to aim for synergy more frequently than just, individual power, I think. But what about the last color pair, blue-white? Does it fare any better than black-green does? Does it actually have a deck now? This time around, Blue-White also got a Signpost uncommon after not having one in Ixalan, where the card that sort of filled that role was Favorable Winds, which encouraged you to build a flying heavy deck. It is no coincidence then that Resplendent Griffin, the Signpost uncommon here, happens to have flying, but it also comes with the Ascend mechanic. This color pair is a good one for getting to Ascend and for flyers, and I think the design team was a little more successful in establishing this identity in this set. First, let's look at the Blue-White cards with Ascend at the lower rarities. We have Expel from Orazca, Secrets of the Golden City, Spirewinder, which also happens to have flying, so it fits well into both. It's a card with Ascend and with flying. Pride of Conquerors is good here if you can get enough flyers going. Sky Marcher Aspirant, another one that fits in very well, sort of a, it's monocolored, but it's sort of a signpost card in a way, in the sense that it is both has Ascend and gains flying when you do Ascend, so it works very well in this deck. Snubhorn Sentry has Ascend. I don't like it particularly since it's so small and an ineffective blocker early. In the late game, it does become bigger. Slippery Scoundrel becomes an unblockable hexproof problem in the later game for your opponent. So why are Blue-White good at Ascending? We see that they have all these commons and uncommons with Ascend, but what makes Blue-White good at Ascending? Well, there's a few things. One of these is enchantments-based removal. This kind of removal means that you are keeping a permanent on the board in a case where most other decks wouldn't. Most other decks are going to cast a lightning strike, destroy a permanent, and not have a permanent on the battlefield, whereas Blue-White has cards like Baffling End, which allows you to get rid of your opponent's creature while also adding to the board a permanent that can help you Ascend. Same thing with Luminous Bonds. Squire's Devotion gives you 2 permanents, so it's nice in this deck. Aquatic Incursion is more for the Merfolk deck, but if you really want to get Ascend, if you have a big bomb rare with Ascend, Aquatic Incursion is one of the best cards at getting you there because it gives you 3 permanents for the price of 1. Curious Obsession is an aura, so you can put it on your creatures. It can help you draw cards, which can help you play more permanents. Sailor of Means makes 2 permanents while also helping you fix. Sea Legs, we've seen, when we talked about pirates, it's an enchantment. It stays in play and has an effect on the board while still building you towards Ascending, and that's true also of Waterknot. So these are the cards that sort of make Ascending at common and uncommon anyway easier to do for Blue-White. But it's also about flyers. We still have Favorable Winds. That's still a card you want to try to build around, and in general, the Blue-White Skies strategy is a strong one. If you can just curve out with a bunch of flyers, you're going to kill a lot of opponents. So let's look at the flyers at blue and white. So there's Kitesail Corsair, which I think is just a very good common. He doesn't always have flying, but he has it when he attacks, and that's really what matters. Siren Reaver has flying. Exultant Sky Marcher we've seen. Majestic Helioptera is probably not going to be at its best here, but it is worth noting. There are other dinosaurs around that have flying, but why would you want Majestic Heliopterus to give them flying? Because they already have it. So the Heliopterus isn't great here, but Suncrested Pterodon is fine, especially if you have a few dinosaurs lying around. I actually like Soul of the Rapids a decent amount. It's a good one to put your auras on because it has hexproof and it has flying. There are some key cards in Ixalan as well, in addition to all of these cards we've already looked at. I think Favorable Winds is one of the most important because it enables you to really have some synergy for having all these flyers, and making all your flyers +1/+1 bigger is a big difference. Air Elemental, Imperial Aerosaur, and Shining Aerosaur were all very good flyers in the set, and they will continue to be. There are some rares in Ixalan, rivals of Ixalan, that are, best suited to this deck or good in this deck. Obviously, Azor the Lawbringer is one of the ways you're going to most commonly end up in this deck. If you just first pick him, you're going to be like, well, we're building Blue-White because he's completely broken. Kumena's Awakening has Ascend, as does Timestream Navigator. And Warkite Marauder is a nice flyer, more than nice. It's an excellent flyer that can really help you win games by making your opponent's creatures basically unable to attack. Unable to block, rather. So overall, I think Blue-White has a better identity, but it's still less clear than the other 8 color pairs we looked at. But, Azor the Lawbringer is a good reason to just end up in this deck. And Favorable Winds is powerful, and if you end up just finding yourself with a bunch of blue and white flyers in pack 3, no one else is going to be taking Favorable Winds except for you. So you may get a couple of them, and that will feel pretty good. Overall, Blue-White, I think, is going to be okay. I don't know about Black-Green. I'm certainly not going to, start drafts by hoping I can be playing Black-Green just because it seems so lost. So those are all 10 archetypes within this format, all 10 color pairs, all the different synergies within them. I hope it helps you in your drafts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch more limited content and Magic content in general, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be doing Rivals of Ixalan draft videos next week once it gets on Magic Online. There'll be 2 of those a week for a while, and that'll be pretty fun. I'm excited to play the new format. Some people are a little less excited because they think it just looks more of the same, and maybe it is to some extent, but the cards are different. It'll be a different format. I think it'll be slower for one thing, and that'll be nice as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and good luck in all your drafts.